This is a period of Ashleishim, so I'm dedicating the class in her memory. We're good to go? All right.
Sorry, who was that?
Kathy Manson, the wife of Ernest Manson. Okay. So, please do not be scared by all these books. It's just some fish. I'm just having some Gefilte fish tonight. It's not a secret that Jewish people eat Gefilte fish on Friday night and on Shabbos, and people eat herring. And fish is like it's a Shabbos thing. So I thought, might be a good idea to find out what this is all about. What are the origins? Where does this all come from? Is it all that important? And how did it come to be that Jewish people really all over the world eat fish on Shabbos? So the first thing I'm going to introduce to you to is a Gemara, a statement which is made in the Talmud. The Talmud, of course, is the earliest redaction of Jewish law. The Karasala Shabbos Einig, says the Gemara on Daf Kuf Yud Ches Amud Beis, page 118, side B. The Gemara says Shabbat is called, the terminology that's used is pleasure. That's a verse. That's a pasuk. It's a prophetic expression of our sages, of our prophets, that describes Shabbos, and it's called Einig. So Have Eimer, the Gemara says Einig Shabbos. When the prophets called it Oneg, when the prophets called Shabbat pleasure, they meant this is the pleasure of Shabbos. So the Gemara says, okay, how does that work? Bameh me'angai. With what do we achieve pleasure on Shabbos? There are all kinds of pleasure. It says pleasure. What's the pleasure? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, Brei de Rav Shmuel bar Shilas, this sage whose name was Yehuda, the son of a sage whose name was Shmuel, who was the son of a sage named Shilas, says Mishmei de Rav, in the name of Rav, who was one of the senior sages of Bavel. And he says, B'tafshel shel trodin, which is probably something like borscht, V'dogim gedolim, and big fish, V'roshei shumen, and large heads of garlic. Okay. Rashi says, Tavshin shel trodin, a dish of beets, he says choshevu. That was considered to be an impressive delicacy. And then he says, Roshei shumen, heads of garlic, chashuvim hayu lahen. Heads of garlic were prominent in its time. Maybe not today, but it was prominent in its time. Rashi says nothing about the big fish. But it seems pretty clear that on Shabbos we're supposed to eat fish. So the Gemara. Straight up the Gemara. Okay. Then we turn a couple of pages here, one page over, and we get a detail of how the sages used to prepare for Shabbos. Rav Safra Machrech Reisha. Rav Safra used to barbecue a head of an ox, of a goat, I don't know. He would barbecue. That was a delicacy they made. And Rava, who was another great sage, Malach Shibuta. He would salt a shibuta. What is a shibuta? So the shibuta, the Gemara doesn't tell us what it is. However, this is mentioned in other places as well. In the Gemara in Meseches Kiddushin, we are told that it's better to do a mitzvah by yourself instead of legislating it to somebody else to do. And the truth is, I've never seen this done, but in theory, the chassan wouldn't have to show up at a wedding. He could send somebody else. And the chassan can not be there. And somebody would give a kala a ring, and he would say, you are mekudesh, you are betrothed to so-and-so. I'm giving it on his behalf. And she'd be an Eishes Ish. It's not a good idea, though, says the Gemara. The Gemara says it's always mitzvah by yeser mibishluchei. And how do we know this? Because it's a mitzvah to prepare for Shabbat Kodesh. And it says, the Gemara brings on the same Gemara that Rav Safra Machrech Reisha and Ravach Malach Shibuta. So here, the Gemara, Rashi tells us Shibuta is a dog, a fish. Okay, so now I know that Rava was making herring. He was salting fish, a big fish. What exactly is the Shibuta? So, it seems pretty much that it's a fish. There's a Gemara in Meseches Chulin that says that everything that Hashem proscribed, He also permitted. He said He proscribed the meat of a pig, but He allowed us to eat shibuta, and the Gemara in Chulin maintains that the taste of shibuta is very similar to the taste of the meat that comes from a pig. I guess bacon or something like that. So there's a whole discussion about what exactly a shibuta is, and the Minchas Chinuch, in his commentary, there's a book here somewhere. Here it is. in his commentary on the mitzvah, which talks about not using two animals yoked up to the same plow. So the Gemara says that you're not allowed to yoke a goat and a shibuta. It's very hard to imagine what that would look like. A goat would be on dry land, and the shibuta would be in the river, but it'd be a large fish. And I guess somehow you'd have something tethered to the fish and something tethered to the goat, and together they'd be pulling your plow. And he has a whole discussion there what this might be. And he has proofs back and forth. And the Minchas Chinuch says that in all likelihood, there may be two different kinds of shibuta fish. There's a non-kosher fish and a kosher fish. He says pretty clearly it's a fish. He says shnei minim, there's two different kinds. And he says it may even be two different kinds which are all pure. Might be one which is Torah, one which is not Torah. All right, so it's pretty clear that shibuta is a fish. I did decide to Google this, and amazingly, yes, Rabbi Google says that there is a fish called Shabbat. It's called Aribarbus grypus. It's a species of the cyprinid fish, called in English, Persian or Arabic by the alternate common name of Shabut, Shabut, or Shabbat, which we have no reason to think has anything to do with Shabbat, but anyway, is a large freshwater carp which is found in the Tigris-Euphrates basin as well as southern Iran. That makes sense because Rava lived in Bavel. So this was a fish that was growing there. It says it's commercially grown in that region, and the species, according to Wikipedia, can grow to the length of 2 meters, 6 or 7 feet, and it can weigh over 110 pounds. So that's like some serious herring that Rava was preparing for Shabbos. And that's the meaning of Rava Malach Shibuta. Rava was preparing fish. So now we have a Gemara. It asks, with what do you have pleasure? And the Gemara told us borscht, and the Gemara told us garlic and big fish. And we hear of Rava actually making giant herring, a big, huge fish. A 6-foot fish. It's like serious stuff. Okay? Talk about a heavy-duty Shabbos meal. Very nice. And then the Gemara goes on and tells us a story. Everybody likes stories, right? Okay. So the story is that there was a man whose name was Yosef Moker Shabbat, which means Yosef who would value the holy Shabbat. Why did he have that name, and what's the story with him? So the Gemara goes on to say, Hava hu nachri bishvivuse. There was this Gentile who was living in Yosef Moker Shabbat's neighborhood, and he would respect the Shabbat. Now this fellow, the Havin Afishi Nische Tuva, he was very wealthy. He had enormous residuals. Amri Lei Kaldoi, these Chaldeans, where there's a whole discussion what exactly a kind of Chaldean this is. Some say it's a stargazer, others say it's some other kind of clairvoyant guy. At any rate, people who use mediums to obtain information which is not available to us in the normative sense. But anyway, these people who had some kind of sixth sense or other awareness told him, Kulu nischi Yosef Moker Shabbat achaluhu. All of your money is going to end up going to this guy, this Jew Yosef. Well, this fellow, he believed in his stargazers, and he was very unhappy about this. So Azal zabninhu lechulu nichse. He went and sold all of his residuals, sold everything. And the Gemara says, Zaban bahu marganisa. He bought this incredible jewel. And then, after he bought this incredible jewel, Oisva bisiyone, he sewed it into his turban. So this is like the purloined letter. If you want to hide something very valuable, where do you hide it? In plain sight. He had this enormous stone, which was worth millions of dollars, and he had it sewn on like a sequin, like a bauble, like nobody would ever believe it's real. And that's how he felt safe. Nobody would steal it. And it was with other sequins which were not worth very much money. Bahadi the Ka'avar Ma'bara, he was running away from Yosef. He didn't want his money to go to the hands of this Jew. And he's going over this river, and Afarche Zika, suddenly a gale wind comes sweeping in, Shadya b'maya, and it hurls his turban into the river. Bole kavra, a fish swallowed it. Askua asyuha apanya de ma'ila shabbata. The fishermen brought up this fish on Friday. Amru, the fish people said to each other, Man zavan ki hashta, who's going to buy a fish so late on Friday afternoon? Amri lahu, they said to him, you have a big fish to sell. You don't want to sell it 3 days later, then it's old fish. So a nice fresh fish. They said, you know what? Amri lahu zilu Atmoyuhi legabe Yosef. Go run to Yosef Maker Shabbat, because he loves Shabbat and he'll do anything he can. All right? Regilna dezavin. He always buys whatever he can get his hands on for Shabbos, and it seems clear that what does he buy? Fish. Am to Yuha, Nihole Zavne. They brought it to him, and he bought it on the spot. He says, for Shabbos, bought it on the spot. And he himself, Korei Ashkach be Maganisa. He tore open the fish, this enormous fish, and what did he find? This amazing diamond. Zavne betlesa Alicia the dinidava. He sold it for 13 stories of gold. And there's a discussion amongst the commentaries if this is literal or not. Some people said it was like small gold vessels. You would have to kind of line them up, or it would stretch the height of 13 stories. Pogabe Ahu Saba. So this old man met him. Omar, he said to Yosef, Man diz Yosef Shabbasa Pare Shabbata. He who accompanies the Shabbat takes care of him. You took care of Shabbat took care of you. So, we have a Gemara that tells us what is oineg. Get borscht, thanks a lot for that. Garlic, whatever. Big fish. Rava, in 2 places in the Gemara, is salting a giant 6-foot herring. Big fish. This fellow Yosef Maker Shabbos, what is he doing? Enormous fish. Gewaldig. So we have so far 4 sources in the Talmud in which we talk about big fish. Now I found another source. And this is a source which is found also from the same genre of our sages. It's in the Medrash Kehilas Rabbah. It speaks about the day Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi went to his eternal reward. And the Medrash says it was on a Friday. And the Medrash goes on to talk about this unbelievable funeral. Of course, he was laid to rest that day, as Jews are supposed to. And it talks about going to his 18 funeral ceremonies. He stopped in 18 places, and 18 eulogies were given. The whole town shut down. It's like it's an unbelievable amount of mourning for one of the greatest sages of all time. And the Gemara then says they finally brought his bear to Beis Sha'arim, where he used to live, and it says, Usloyain Yoima, the day was suspended. The day was suspended, which seems to sound to us like a miracle happened. Somehow the sun didn't set. And ad demota kol chad v'chad miYisrael lebeisei, until all of the hundreds of thousands, or maybe more mourners, got to their home. Umadlik lo yisaner, everybody had a chance to light the Shabbat candles. V'tzoila lo yidog, they all had a chance to fry up the fish. Okay, so now we know what the Jewish people, how did they celebrate Shabbos? It's very clear. They celebrated Shabbos with fish. It's very clear. We have 4 sources in the Talmud, and a 4th Medrash Shabbat source, which is from the times of the Mishnah, and we keep hearing about fish. Not once have we heard about a piece of steak, not once have we heard about challah even, but we keep hearing about fish. Now, with so many sources of our sages, you would think that when it comes to halacha, we're going to hear about the halacha of eating fish. But like the Malaysian airliner that suddenly dropped out of the sky 5 years ago, this trail goes cold. Just goes cold. After the sages, after the era of the Talmud, we start seeing the halacha develop, and in no halacha svarim is there this idea that you have to eat fish. We live in a time you can't even lose an email. A 747 drops out of the air and nobody knows where it is. I mean, this is like, how did this happen? The trail goes cold, and we have all these amazing sources, and yet I cannot find a single Rishon, a single one of the Rishonim, who actually says it's a custom to eat fish on Shabbos. So this is just 2 examples. There's enough books here already. I guess just two examples. There's the father of all minhagei Ashkenaz. All of the things we do in the Ashkenazic world come from the minhagim of the Maharil, Rabbi Yaakov Mulin. So I went to Rabbi Yaakov Mulin and took along his sefer. It's got a whole thing on Shabbos. And he talks about all kinds of things, including kugel. No fish. No fish. Here it says, Amar Mari Segel, Rabbi Yaakov Segel said, Taimla de'achli mulaya b'leil Shabbos. You know why you eat stuffed things on Shabbos? So stuffed things on Shabbos, it sounds zeichel l'mun. It's a memory of the mun, which the mun had tal, it had dew, malmata and dew, umayla and lamata. The tal, the dew fell, and then the manna fell, and then it was kind of sealed in a Ziploc with manna sandwiched between dew. Hachinami basar munach ben shnei dape isa. So too, we have meat, which is baked in some kind of kugel, and you have a bottom of the kugel, a top of the kugel. It was a meat kugel, which was once popular to have. So we have meat kugel. The commentaries say this is called pashtida. The Ramah says we don't do this. It seems to be a difference between Germanic customs and Polish customs. In Poland, it seems they didn't make this kind of kugel. In Germany, they did. We're talking kugel. There's no herring. There's no gefilte fish. It's very strange. Flying across the continent to the Iberian Peninsula, we go to Rabbeinu Aaron Milunil, who's also the author of the Kolbo, and this is recently printed from his manuscripts, a Sefer Erches Chaim, reprinted from manuscript just 25 years ago. And it's got all kinds of details on what has to happen on Shabbos, including a chapter which is called Shalosh Seudas, the 3 meals of Shabbos. And towards the end he says, and I quote, V'tzarach kol adam la'aneges haShabbos. Everybody has got to delight in the Shabbat. As it says, V'karasa l'Shabbos einig. Shabbos is called pleasure. We just read that together, right? That's the Gemara. Okay. Ve'zeu einig. And what's the pleasure? Shamur Razal. Okay, now we're finally going to hear it, right? What's the pleasure? He's quoting the Gemara in Shabbos. Kosav Rambam says the Rabbi Milunil. The Rambam wrote, make sure it's fatty. He didn't say what. Make sure it's fatty. Make sure it's mevusam. Make sure it smells delicious. Mashke tov, good drink. V'choshev, hakrei lefim umayni, as much as you could afford. Anybody who spends a lot on Shabbos, and you prepare a lot of wonderful foods, this is praiseworthy. No fish. The trail is gone cold. No fish. The Rambam doesn't mention a word about fish. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say a word about fish. The Torah doesn't say a word about fish. Not one word. When you go to the Shulchan Aruch, you find the words of the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham says, the Shulchan Aruch says that even somebody who is a charity case, you still have to try to honor the Shabbat. Still try to honor the Shabbat, still do what you could. So the Magen Avraham, now we're talking 16th century commentary. He says that you should know that it says in the Sefer called Tikkunei Shabbos, which this is a Sefer that's written by a Talmud of Rav Moshe Cordovero, that he heard from the Arizal, Sheyochel b'chol Seuda Shabbos, Mishalish Seudas dogim. They should eat fish in all the meals. So we have we went cold for 1,000 years. The trail is cold. And all of a sudden the Magen Avraham is talking about fish again. He's quoting from the 15th century, he's quoting from the Talmud of the Arizal. And he had the quote in the Talmud of the Arizal, which over there it says, Sarach lechel dog b'Shabbos ma toiv. Eat as much fish as you can. And eat it ma toiv, how better? Sheyiyah b'chol shalosh sudas. Each of the 3 meals should have fish. Doesn't say gefilte, should have fish. All right, so I'm just like, what happened over here? How come there's no documentation? Now, as a matter of fact, if you will do the research, you will find out that gefilte fish is very, very old. It's very old. In fact, it's brought down in some places that this business of eating mulaisa, of eating the stuffed thing, was fulfilled in part with gefilte fish. That's why the original gefilte fish was taking the skin off the fish, and then taking the fish, the pike, the carp, the salmon, whatever it was, chopping it up, eggs, carrots, potatoes, old bread, you name it, and a little fish became a much bigger fish to feed everybody, and then it got wrapped back in the skin. And it seems like somewhere about the 17th century they dropped the skin. They just started making fish logs or fish balls. So initially it seems that the fish wrapped around it was fulfilling this custom of mulaisa, of the stuffed something. Now we have Rabbi Yaakov Mullen talking about stuffed kugel. He doesn't say anything about fish. And to the best of our knowledge, gefilte fish is hundreds of years old. Well, if gefilte fish is hundreds of years old, why don't we hear about it? Why doesn't the Shulchan Aruch talk about it? Why doesn't any of the halachic masters talk about it? The only other place I found something about fish is in the commentary on the Torah, but it's not about the Seudas Shabbos at all. The Torah, which is the forerunner of the Shulchan Aruch, in chapter 256, incidentally, the chapter we're talking about now speaks about the food of Shabbos is chapter 242. But in chapter 256, over there it talks about sounding the trumpet, the shofar, before Shabbos. It's a Mishnah. And in certain Jewish neighborhoods, say they have a siren that goes off before Shabbos to remind everybody Shabbos is coming. So he talks about sounding, what they used to sound in antiquity, and the Bach, who is a commentary, the Bayit Chodesh, major commentary on the Torah, says, Va'achshav, and now, minhag bit kehilas gedolos, it's customary in the large communities, Jewish communities, that when it comes about a half hour before the time for Shabbos to come in, Machres HaShamash, the Shamash makes a loud announcement, Levashal Dogim, go cook your fish. And that's b'mokem atkiya. We don't have the ability, we don't have a place to blow the shofar, we don't do that anymore. But we do make an announcement, go cook your fish. Okay, so we have evidence from the 17th century that people were cooking fish. In fact, that was the announcement. He didn't say go cook your kugel, he didn't say go make a cholent, he said go cook your fish. So they were making fish. Well, if they're making fish, then why doesn't the Torah speak about fish? How did this trail go cold? This was a mystery that was driving me crazy. I couldn't figure this out today. So, the answer is going to be in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch does something very, very interesting. In Siman Reish Mem Beis, which is chapter 242, where the laws of Shabbos begin, it starts with the preparations of Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe brings down this idea that there's a concept of oineg, of pleasure, and there's a discussion of whether this is biblical or rabbinic. I don't want to get into that now. And then he says in the second subsection of chapter 242, so with what do we bring pleasure? And the Alter Rebbe here says something which the previous iteration of the Jewish law do not say. B'yemei chachmei haGemara, he says, in the days of the Talmud, they were very into fish, he says. And then beets and whatever. In their days, that was the creme de la creme, the delicacy of all delicacies. He says that was those days. But every place follows its custom. So if fish is the big thing, then it's fish. If fish is not the big thing, then it's not fish. Whatever you consider to be pleasurable, whatever you like, that's how you honor the Shabbos. Oh, so the Alter Rebbe is telling us, he just answered the question. He opened their eyes here. He says that this was in the time of the Gemara. So clearly, at some period after the Talmud, fish were not so popular. And that wasn't the thing. Maybe meat became the big thing. Maybe chicken became the big thing. Fish wasn't the big thing. Seems pretty clear. Now here's something fascinating that I found. I found the Medrash Rabbah. The Medrash Rabbah is in Bereshis, the beginning of the Torah, and it says, quote, Amar Rabbi Tanchuma. Rabbi Tanchuma says, Uvda haya beroimi, there was the story in Rome, and it happened ba'aruvas tzoyma Rabbah, on the eve of the Great Fast. You all know when that is, right? Yes? Erev Yom Kippur, very good. Erev Yom Kippur. So what happened ba'uvda of tzoyma Rabbah? So the Matnas Kahuna says, there was a story in the city of Rome, Be'erev Yom HaKippurim. Shenikra Tzuma Rabbah. It's called the Great Fast, because it's gadol, it's big, and it's chomer, it's very stringent. What was the story? So the story was, says the Matnas Kahuna, there was a tailor. He was a Numan, he was an expert tailor. Okay, he was a phenomenal tailor. And what happened with this phenomenal tailor is he was haggling over a fish. There was just one fish left. And everybody wanted to buy this fish. And it boiled down to him, and Nar Echad was an Eved for the Apirkos. There was a young lad who was a servant of the sovereign. Sar Ha'ir, the mayor of Rome, or something like that. So they started a bidding war. Everybody wanted that last fish. And in the end, they bid it up to a very, very high price. It went to the price of 12 dinars. Very high price. So the servant said, my master is going to have my head if I come home with fish for 12 dinars. It's probably like paying $1,200 for a fish or something crazy like that. He said, I'm buying maybe it's $120 a fish. I don't know. I'm not buying a fish for that kind of money. So he left it. He comes to comes to his master, and he says, "Where's the fish?" Lama loy aisili nun. It's Aramaic. Why did you bring me a fish? So he says, "Amarli Mari ma lichber minach." Like, really, what do you want from me? It wasn't up to me. Like, it was an impossible situation. There was only one fish, and it was Taman el Achad Nun, and there was this Jewish tailor, and the Jewish tailor spent 12 dinners on a fish. The mayor was blown away. Shalach Basrei sends for him. Also Lagabi, the tailor comes to the mayor or sovereign, and he says to him, "Tell me, you always eat fish for $1,200? This is normal for you?" So he said to him, Amar le Mari, he said, "My master, Islan Chadjem, we have one day. The kol choivin da anan avdin kol yemei shata. All the things we do wrong all year, have a mechaper lein. All the things we do wrong, this one day wipes the slate clean." He says, "V'chad hi asa les anan sichana liakri yasei." Don't you think I should value that day? Don't you think I should honor that day? And that's why he says, I spend so much money on the fish. And the Yeshua Yankiv says, because this day is so special, so anachnu, it says we have to honor this day. And because we have to honor this day, that's why I spend so much money on the fish. Now the Medrash finishes off and tells us a story and says you should know that it happened once, that he tore open a fish, and there was a diamond inside the fish. Okay, and so he got his money back. Similar story to Yosef Morka Shabbos, but what's the major difference between the two stories? Yosef Morka Shabbos bought a fish for Shabbos. And this tailor bought a fish in Rome, not in Israel, in Rome for Yom Kippur. But we don't eat on Yom Kippur. So when were they buying this fish for? For Erev Yom Kippur. And Erev Yom Kippur is definitely not Sudat Shabbat, and it's not Sudat Yom Tov. You don't make Kiddush. But what does this matter show us? It shows us that when the tailor wanted to honor Yom Kippur, what did he buy? Fish. For that kind of money, he could have bought steak, no? I guess once upon a time, steak wasn't the big thing. Fish was the big thing. So from this medrash, it seems so clear. This proves Alter Rebbe's point. In those days, fish was the big thing. And now it gets even more interesting. It's the Alter Rebbe. A page later, he talks about the food of Shabbos. And he says in Seif Zayin, in subsection 7, V'toiv li zoher lechel dogim b'chol su'uda. Here he's quoting the Magen Avram. Earlier he quoted the Gemara. Nobody else quoted the Gemara. But the Alter Rebbe, in quoting the Gemara, showed how it's not applicable today. He said it wasn't because there was something special about fish. It was because that was the big thing then. Says the Alter Rebbe, though, now quoting the Magen Avram, it's good to do your best to eat fish each meal. Unless fish doesn't sit well with you. And he says, if it's not your nature, or you just don't like fish, so then it's not oinig, then it's not pleasure, then it's tsar, it makes you nauseous, you don't have to eat it. HaShabbos la'oinig nitan, the Shabbos was given for pleasure. You don't like matzah, tough luck, nobody likes matzah. Chew on it, that's the mitzvah. You don't like fish, if you don't like fish, what's the point? The whole point is that you should have the pleasure. So here, the Alter Rebbe says, but what happens if our neighbors get wind of the fact that Jews want fish for Shabbos? This goes to the old supply-demand. So, there's a demand. So what are they going to do? Jack up the price. And guess what? Historically, this was done multiple times to the point that the Jews couldn't afford fish. So then the Alter Rebbe says it would be a good idea to make an injunction that nobody should buy fish for Shabbos. In other words, it's not like this is like set in stone. This is not Torah from Sinai. You have to eat fish on Shabbos, because if it's gouging, this is price gouging, then don't eat fish. Don't eat fish. And in this way, the price will come down. Then everybody could enjoy Shabbos instead of just the wealthy class. So because we don't only want to take care of the top tier of people, everybody should be able to afford it. So then everybody shouldn't have Shabbos for fish for a while, and later everybody could afford it. Very nice. Alter Rebbe says in something called Kuntres Achron, which is like a final rumination, he brings down from the son of a sefer called Beis Hillel, that he says It's not so simple. You have to spend a lot of money. Up to a third of your residuals have to be spent. And he says because dogam is a chiyav gomer midoiraisa. It's biblically binding. The Rebbe says, with all due respect, v'hu tamua miyoi, this is shocking. How could the son of the Beis Hillel say that it's biblically required to eat fish? Harambam v'Shulchan Aruch hashmitu chiyav deraisa. You're telling me that the Rambam dropped a biblical mitzvah? The Rambam just forgot to include something biblical? The Shulchan Aruch, the Torah, they just forgot. The Poskim we talked about, nobody talks about fish, but fish is actually min HaTorah. The Alter Rebbe disputes this idea entirely. And he says, "V'oid miksivi dogem beiraisa." Show me where it says fish in the Torah. Where does it say fish? It says you should eat gefilte fish. It says you should eat Shmaltz herring. Where does it say it? V'gam Rabbanan, he says, "Ein tam b'derech hanigla sheyitakna dafka dogem." Even rabbinically speaking, there's no reason that it has to be specifically fish. Now, that's a very important word the Alter Rebbe just used there. He says, "Mitam the nigla." From the reason of the revealed area of Torah. So that word, mitam de nigla, there's an unedited talk from the Rebbe which is found in volume 31 of Lukat Siches, where the Rebbe speaks about a dispute whether on Yom Tov you have an extra soul, or only on Shabbat you have an extra soul. And the Alter Rebbe, he says, if you look carefully in the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe here in the Sikha wants to differentiate between things which come from a revealed source, which means halacha, or things which come from a Kabbalistic or mystical source, which is not the cut and dry halacha. And he says, in Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the concept of fish, and he says, Eim tam b'derech hanigla. There isn't a reason. B'derech hanigla. Nigla means revealed. Nigla is the word which is used to describe the exoteric part of Torah. There's an esoteric or mystical, Kabbalistic part of Torah. Exoterically speaking, from that which is revealed, halacha, there's no reason it has to be fish. It's just those days they used to fish. However, in the Siddur is where the Alter Rebbe brings Piskei Dinim, which are relevant not only in Nigla, but also things which are relevant al pi Kabbalah. There in the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe says, before Sudash Lishit, he says, Tov lechel dog b'seuda zu yoter mi b'shar seudot. It's good to eat fish at Sudash Lishit, even more than the other ones, even more. So even more means you're supposed to eat fish by the other ones too, but this is even more. So the Rebbe suggests, so when the Alter Rebbe says this in the Siddur, he's talking about from a mystical perspective, not from a technical perspective. And now everything's starting to become clear to us. In the Talmud, it speaks about halacha, not mysticism, not pnimius anyan, not Kabbalah. From a halachic perspective, the concept of fish is no more than whatever is the flavor of the day. That was wonderful for those days. Great! Here, look at that fellow in Rome. We spent 12 dinars for our fish on Erev Yom Kippur. That was the great delicacy. He wanted to honor Yom Kippur. Very nice. So you want to honor Shabbat? Rava was making this enormous herring. 2 meters long herring. Imagine what a kiddush that was. It was a job. So Rava didn't make a little Shmaltz herring. It's a big deal. That was those days. It was those days. And then things changed. And then fish wasn't so popular anymore. Made it become popular later. So since it wasn't such a big deal, a bederach hanigla doesn't have to be fish. And therefore, even though it's nice to have fish, and the Alter Rebbe brings it in Shulchan Aruch, and he's quoting the Magen Avraham, who's quoting the Shalah and the Arizal, ultimately, because from a mystical perspective it should be there, that's fine. So from a mystical perspective, and the Rebbe goes on to say, the idea of eating fish is also connected to a mystical perspective. So in halacha is a different story. Halacha, it's not required, necessarily. Even though later the Magen Avraham brings it in the frame of halacha. But here's the interesting thing. Minhag Yisrael, the custom of the Jewish people, not what's written in the books, but the custom of the Jewish people seems always to have been with a fish-oriented celebration. So much so that one of the reasons they came up with gefilte fish is because that was the only way they could serve everybody fish. People couldn't afford the fish. But if you take the older bread that was left over from the week, which had nothing to do with anyway, and you mixed it together with onions and potatoes, lots of that. Throw in some carrots they grew in the ground, no problem in Belarus. This is available. Kroiti people always had sauerkraut. You mix it all together. You created a whole fish dish. You put a little fish skin on the top, a little fish skin on the bottom, and in the middle was a real gefilte fish. So clearly, they wanted to do this. And from the fact that there was people who were jacking up the prices, or these anti-Semites were trying to take advantage of the Jewish people, what does it tell you? We don't hear them doing anything else to persecute or torment the people, but they start to take advantage of their fish on Shabbos. That tells you that minhag Yisrael, that the custom of Jewish people always was to eat fish. It's not halachic. It's not halachic. Many customs of the Jewish people are based on the mysteries of Kabbalah. So now we're starting to have a new appreciation here. We're starting to understand that this is not just a question of the technicalities of halacha, but rather now we're talking about the mysteries of Kabbalah. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the mysteries of Kabbalah. What is the reason for fish? So first of all, in no particular order, I want to share with you something that the Shalah writes. The Shalah says in his famous Sefer Shnei Luchos Habris, and what he calls Masechet Shabbat, he says, Tzarech lizoir b'chol seuda mishalosh seudas. You have to be very careful that at all three meals there should be basar, dagim, and yayin. Meat, fish, and wine. Now usually, when you have a meal, your main course is fish or meat. People don't have two main courses. What's your entree? You have a, whatever it is before, and then you have a main course. Shabbos is the only kind of meal where you have two main courses, a fish main course and a meat main course. So the Shalah says that's the way it has to be. And he says that the words basar, dagim, yayin, he says with mispar katan, which is a form of gematria, it spells the number 7. How does it get to 7? So basar, meat, that's beis. Beis is 2. And then we have dagim, starts with a dalad. Dalad is 4. Aleph, beis, gimel, dalad, number 4. So now we have 2 and 4, we get 6. 2 plus 4 is 6. Yayin is 10. Yeah. But mispar katan means that we only count up till 10. So once we get to 10, we go back to 1 again. We don't look at 10 as 1. We consider 10, we look at as 1. And chaf is 20, so it's 2. And lamed is 30, so it's 3. So the mispar katan comes out to the number 7. Of course, Shabbos is 7th day of the week. So he says, you see, it's very important. And he says, then, if you take the words basar, dagim, and yayin, you take the second letter, you end up with the same 7. Because shin is 300, which is 3. And the second word is gimel, is 3 again. That's 6. And then yayin is 1. Again, you end up with 7. And then he says, take the last letter of each word. And the last letter of basar, reish, is 200, is 2. And dag is dagim, ends with a mem. So that's 4, gives you 6. Or no, it works at the basar, there would be reish. And dag is gimel, gives you 5. Sorry, no, there is no third letter in, so it's only basar and yayin would again give you 2 and 5, again gives you 7. So he says, and the Shalah says, why do you have 7 spelled out 3 times? Because you're supposed to have 3 meals. And at all 3 meals, you have basar, dagim, and yayin. Okay? So you have this mystical code of basar, dagim, and yayin, and he says very clearly we should have basar, dagim, and yayin. What might be the reason for this, though? Why is it so important to have basar, dagim, and yayin? We have an emphasis here on fish, even though, as we saw, halachically, fish is not necessary. It doesn't have to be. In the Sefer Tzadikim, it's brought down, and I quote, Mitzvah gedoyla likneis dagim l'kavod Shabbos. It's a big mitzvah to buy fish to honor Shabbos. And he says, it's a mitzvah lechel b'chol seuda miseudas Shabbos. It's a mitzvah to eat fish on each of the meals of Shabbos, ubefrat b'seuda shlishit, especially on the third meal. The Alter Rebbe says that clearly. He says, toiv lechel dag yoser mebishas seudas. It's even more important. In other words, that's like the most important. So one of the reasons that it's the most important is in the Sefer Shar HaKoilel, he sends us off to a Sefer called Megala Amukos. And the Sefer Megala Amukos, it says that when Moshe Rabbeinu was praying, it says, V'eschanan el Hashem be'es hahi refers to the time of Moshe's passing. When did Moshe Rabbeinu pass on? The end of Shabbat. He passed on Shabbat, the end of Shabbat. So the end of Shabbat He said this is the time when Moshe Rabbeinu soared heavenward, and this is a time where there is a special, so to speak, Eini Pikcha, it says, a time when Hashem's eyes are open to watch over us, and there's one animal whose eyes never close. And his name is the fish. Okay? So now we have, the fish has no eyelids. So the fish has open eyes, and it represents Hashem's open eyes, and that's what the business of the fish is, especially with regard to the concept of eating fish. And the Sefer Shiras HaShabbat says you should start the first meal with fish. That's the first thing we serve. You should end the last meal with fish, which means the Shabbat meals are bookended with fish. Fish on either side, and that's the way it should be. Now, we'll soon talk about why fish goes first. Fish, as a rule, goes first. We'll talk about that in a minute. So, in order to introduce this next concept that I'm going to share with you, the first place I want to take you is to an Or HaChaim. Or HaChaim HaKodesh. This is an Or HaChaim in the beginning of the Torah, Sefer Bereshis. In the Torah, in chapter 1, in verse 26, it's the 6th day of creation. By Yomer Elikim, God says, Nasa Adam B'Tzalmenu Kidmosenu. Let's make humankind in our image. V'yirdu b'degas hayom, and he will rule over the fish of the sea. Uba eif hashamayim, and in the fowl of the the birds of the fly in the heaven. Uba v'hema, and in the animal b'chol haaretz, down till the remes haremes, even till the creepy crawlers. So v'yirdu usually means he will subdue, he will control, he will harness. Or Chaim says that v'yirdu is also alluding to something that the Zohar talks about, namely the concept of neshamas that have to come back to this world and get reincarnated in the body of an animal temporarily for them to be able to finish something that was left over. So people don't come back twice. There are neshamas that are connected to other neshamas, but nobody lived. You never lived before, and you're not living again, because otherwise by Tchias HaMesim you'd have 5 souls, 5 bodies fighting over the same soul. That wouldn't work. But when it comes to inhabiting the body of an animal for a temporary tikkun, this is a true concept. The Zohar talks about it. So the Or Chaim says that a person is yorad. Yirdu means also yorad, going down. And he says that in the madregas of going down, the first level is to come down into fish. The highest form, the highest neshamas come into fish. The next level is birds. And the last level is actual animals. And therefore he says, the Torah speaks about the fish first, because Yiridas Nefesh Ha'adum L'Madregas HaDogim, coming down into the level of Dogim, is something which is for lofty people. This comes for high souls, for special souls. These souls don't have to go through the pain of Shechita. These souls can be eaten for a sacred purpose, not the souls, the body of the fish, and that releases the soul and brings the tikkun of the soul. So the Or Chaim says that fish are the reincarnation of sacred souls, of the holy souls, righteous souls. And along these lines is a fascinating Rishima from the Rebbe, and this is one of the Rebbe's manuscripts was discovered after Gimel Tammuz. And the Rebbe speaks about a Mishnah that describes what's kosher fish. And the Gemara says kosher fish have a kaskeses and a snapir, that they have fins and scales. The scales are protective scales on the outside and fins. And the Rebbe goes on in this Rishimus Cheveres Lamates to explain how the dag, the second half of the Mishnah, talks about an animal that has horns, an animal that has hooves. And the Rebbe explains that there's 2 kinds of people here. There's the loftier people, the people who immerse themselves in Torah, and then there's the people who are out there in the world. So he says the fish represent the Torah scholar. And what is needed for the Torah scholar? He says this is the idea of kaskeses and snapirin, that the kaskeses is that the fish has to be, or the Talmud Chacham has to be protected with what's called Yireh Shamayim, or reverence for God in heaven. And the reverence for God in heaven, this concept of kaskeses, means that there is a notion of maisim toivim, good deeds. Like it says that for tzedakah kisirian, that the tzedakah become like a coat of mail, that every time a person gives tzedakah, he adds on additional coins, if you will, or little chinks in armor. So he says the Talmud Chacham has to do mitzvahs too. He can't just be a Talmud Chacham. So not only doing mitzvahs, and then he has to be able to progress, not be stuck in the same area. So what do fish do with their flippers? They fish, they move from place to place. So the Rebbe describes in detail how the snaprinen and kaskeses are what's needed for the fish to be a kosher fish, for the Talmud Chacham to be a kosher Talmud Chacham. In other words, the fish represents what? A higher level of consciousness, a higher level of service to Hashem. So with this in mind, I'm going to share with you a very interesting conversation that happened between the great Chose of Lublin, who was the greatest Polish Hasidic master, and a Czechoslovakian Hasidic master who's called the Yismach Moshe. So the two meet, and the Yismach Moshe asks the Chose, how come we're so careful to eat fish on Shabbos, but in fact we don't find the consumption of fish mentioned anywhere in the Torah? Except for grumbling Jews who wanted fish we ate in Egypt. That's the only thing we find. He said we find a meal that Avraham Avinu served to his guests. What did he serve them? He serves the meat and he serves the milk. Not together. But he served the meat and he served the milk. He didn't serve any fish. How come he didn't serve herring? And then he says Moshe Rabbeinu serves a great big feast, and Moshe Rabbeinu himself was the waiter. And what did they feed over there? It says there's no fish that's mentioned over there. It says lechem. They had bread. It doesn't say anything about fish. So actually the Chayze asked the Yismach Moshe this question. So the Yismach Moshe says to him, you know that through the consumption of animals for a holy purpose, souls can be elevated. Souls that get trapped get elevated, right? So he says, once upon a time, pure lofty souls didn't have to come into Gilgul. They finished their job in this world. Only low souls had to come back in the form of meat or in the form of vegetation. But he says, in today's day and age, even the righteous aren't so righteous. They're not so perfect either. He said, and that's why later on the consumption of fish became so prominent. We have this interesting idea where Shabbos, which is the holiest day of the week, is somehow connected to a tikkun, to perfecting the shamas, and we have an emphasis specifically on consuming fish or a higher level of elevation. Now, another idea with regard to the consumption of fish, incidentally, this business that I told you from the Shalah is also brought down by one of the Rishonim. There was a sefer called Leket Yosher, which is a collection of customs. He was a Talmud of the Trumas Hadeshen, who was one of the great Rishonim, wrote Responsa, and he writes over there that dag, the word fish itself, is begematria of 7. And he says that shows on the concept of the 7th. How does dag work out to be 7? Because Dalad is 4 and Gimel is 3, and last time I checked, 4 plus 3 equals 7. There you go. So the business of the dag, there's an emphasis on the concept of the fish. We mentioned already the idea of the dag whose eyes don't close. This is brought down in numerous svarim, the concept of the fish having an open eye, and therefore that represents the Eini Pikcha, the eye of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's always watching over us. Another interesting idea brought down in the Sefer Or Yesha is that Shabbos is always pronounced with a patach. Sfardim and Ashkenazim. People say Shabbos or Shabbat, but it's always Shah. When you want to make people quiet, what do you say? Shah. Shah. So Shah, he says, is because Shabbos is a time for serenity. Shabbos is a time for silence. Shabbos, you're supposed to silence all the silly talk. And he says, of all the animals in the world, who is the only animal that makes no noise whatsoever, even when you kill it? The fish. They're quiet. Animals growl and roar and make noise, not the fish. So he says, therefore, it says in Sefer Yasha, there's a special connection between the concept of fish and the concept of Shabbos. Here's another fascinating idea, which is brought down by the Dinever Rebbe, the Bnei Yisachar, about whom Rabbi Emmanuel Shachat Zechariah Levracha told me, he heard from the Rebbe, you could rely on the Bnei Yisachar like Kisvei Arizal. So the Bnei Yisachar says, on the 5th, there are 3 things in the Torah which get a special blessing. You know what the 3 things are? On Thursday, God blessed the fish. He said, gave the fish a special blessing. On Friday, God gave people a special blessing. On Shabbos, he blessed the Shabbos. So we have 3 things that get a blessing. Fish, people, and Shabbos. It's a knockout combo. So people should eat fish on Shabbos. He says that's what you call, he says, a chut ha-meshulish. That's called the knot which is knotted together thrice. And when you have a chut ha-meshulish, our sages tell us, it doesn't easily unwind when you have 3 good reasons to do this, and of course there are 3 days in a row, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos. 3 days in a row Hashem gives blessing, and it manifests itself in these 3 specific things. So, also, when you put it together, you took Dag, and you took Shabbos, and you took Adam, spell it out, it says, we say, Binois deshe yarbitzeni. God lies me on still pastures. So Binois deshe, which is the idea of pleasure, is the concept of Dogim, Shabbos, and Adam. And of course we know Atem Kriyim Adam. Adam refers specifically to Bnei Yisrael. So there you got it. Fish is the most natural connection to the notion of Shabbos, people eating fish on Shabbos. Another idea which I found is that the fish in Medrash Talpias, it says that the only animals who didn't sin by the time of the Mabul were the fish, and the only animals that didn't die at the time of the Mabul were the fish. So the fish are holier. They come from a primordial time.
Benjamin is fish, and then birds, and then animals.
Yeah.
Why is the beach shunned in the Torah?
Why is what shunned in the Torah?
The fish. Like
The fish are not shunned in the Torah.
No, it's not halachic.
It's not. You're not halachically required, because halacha deals with the concept of oineg on a very literal level. Shabbos says pleasure is pleasure, but on a mystical level, we have this tremendous symbolism of fish. Souls are coming down, and God's eyes are opening, and all kinds of other mystical, beautiful things. So this is all what we call the flowery, mystical, spiritual part of Torah. This marriage has 2 names in halacha. One is acquisition, and one is sanctity. There's like 2 parts of marriage. There's the technical, functional part of marriage, and then there's the beautiful, holy part of it, right? They're both true. The Ben Yehoyada says that because the fish were not punished, this shows that fish really remain above the negative energy of what destroyed people during the Mabul. Now, we all know that in the Gemara, Maseches Brachas, on page 61, there's a story of a man whose name was Papas ben Yehuda. And Papa sees Rabbi Akiva teaching Torah. And Rabbi Akiva is risking his life. And in the end, he gets killed because he taught Torah. And Papa says to him, what are you teaching Torah for? You're gathering these people and teaching them Torah. They're going to kill you in the end, the Romans. And Rabbi Akiva says to him, he says, stop teaching Torah, they won't kill you. Rabbi Akiva says to him, you know, that if we stop teaching Torah, we won't be anymore. And he gives him a story. He says, the fish is swimming around with great anxiety. So the fox said to the fish, what's wrong? And the fish said, what's wrong? We're afraid of the fisherman's nets. So he says, come on dry land. There's no fisherman's nets here. And the fish said to the fox, in the sea, maybe we get caught, maybe we don't. On dry land, for sure we die. Rabbi Akiva said, maybe I get caught, maybe I don't. No Torah, for sure we're finished. Then the Romans won. In the end, Rabbi Akiva does get arrested tragically. And tragically, he is tortured to death. But guess who he meets in prison? Papas. And Papa says, wow, I wish I was you. I'm here for smuggling. And you're here for teaching Torah. He said, Ashrecha shenitfasta b'divrei Torah. But what do we see from that story in the Gemara? We see that fish represent a higher level of closeness to Hashem. Fish represent our cleaving to the Torah. So let me share with you now something fascinating from this week's Parsha. And this is major. Listen to this. In this week's Parsha, we have a phenomenon which is not found anywhere else in the Torah. I didn't forget about Shmaltz. Don't worry, I'm getting this one. Nowhere else in the Torah are there characters which do not spell a word. We have 2 backwards nuns. And it's in front of the words Vayihi b'neso ha'aron. Whenever we take out the Torah, these are the words that we chant. And before and after, we have a backward nun written in the Torah. It's bracketed. So there's a lot to say about this. Really, because the words Vayihi b'neso are inserted. They don't really belong here. And it's inserted because the Torah gives us already 2 negative narratives. Torah doesn't want to record 3 negative narratives in a row. So it inserted something, but to show that it was parachuted in, we have these backward nuns indicating that this doesn't really belong here. So the Kli Yakar says something phenomenal. He says, you know, that what was one of the negative things? The negative things was that the Jewish people were running away from the Torah. They couldn't wait to leave Har Sinai. It says, they said, let's get out of here before he gives us the 614th mitzvah. This is a dangerous place to be. And it says the metaphor that's used is ki yeled haboreach min hacheder, like kids running on the last day of school. When the recess bell goes, they run out. We're supposed to value and cherish the Torah. Instead we said, is it over yet? So this wasn't a good thing. Now, after the story is complaining, grumbling Jews. And guess what they complain and grumble about? The good life in Egypt. And you know what they remembered from Egypt? Fish. This is Zacharnu es hadoga. We remember that delicious fish. Yeah, they forgot that we're getting murdered and killed. We forgot the delicious fish we used to live. We don't have any fish over here. And there's a whole reason why the manna doesn't taste like fish. So the Kli Yakar says that the negative fish on the other side, it's easy to understand. What's with the backwards nun on this side? Oh, I forgot to tell you. Because if you didn't notice from the Medrash before, in Aramaic, the name for fish is nun. Nun is the name of a fish. Nuna or nun. In the Medrash, it says written in Aramaic, was a nun. He bought a nun, meaning a fish. So the Kli Yakar says, we understand why there's the backwards nun, because they were complaining about lack of nun, or remembering the old nun, the fish they had in Egypt. But he says the nun harishain, what's that about? And he says, they were turning their face away from Mount Sinai and turning their face towards the nations. And he says this symbolizes a Jew who turns his face away from his source of life. What's the source of life? The Torah. As the Gemara says with the story of Rabbi Akiva and Papas ben Yehuda. So he says, when Yisrael are borchin mehar Hashem, running away from the mountain of Hashem, kitinech haberech mi beis hasefer, like a child's running away from cheder, they are like a nun, a dog hafuch, a backwards fish, a fish who's swimming away from his source of life. Here's a fish who's going the wrong direction. He's heading for the seashore instead of for the sea depths. He's going to end up washed on shore. He's going to die. Yisrael panu pneim in Aram bris Hashem. They turned away their face from the ark of God, and that's why the nun is hafucha. It's a backwards nun, because that's what it's symbolizing. And the Kli Yakar goes on to say something very sharp. He says, Ikir hachet beinenu. The main sin for us today is that we turn our backs to the Torah. We're still doing the same thing. We're still being a backwards nun. We're turning away from our source of life. We want to find favor in the eyes of the nations. We're doing everything everybody wants, except for one little thing, what Hashem told us to do. That's the backwards nun. So when you think about that, if the backwards nun symbolizes sitting and turning your back on Hashem, then what would a right-faced nun symbolize? Cleaving in devotion to Hashem. Exactly, that's the fish. That's why we want to eat fish on Shabbos, which of course is a mystical concept. On the last day that the Rebbe was in Europe, the last day, the day he boarded the ship in Lisbon, the ship that finally brought him to freedom, literally snatched from the jaws of the lion. Literally the last ship to leave Europe was the ship that Rebbe was on. He was booked for passage on a ship, and a telegram came from his father-in-law, do not go on the ship. And they didn't have any other way to leave Europe. And they didn't go on the ship. Nobody knew why. The Frierdiker Rebbe didn't say why. Tragically, that ship was sunk by a U-boat. And there was somebody who had tickets on a ship, and they gave the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin those tickets. Thank God they were saved as well. And the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin left the last ship to leave the European mainland, the European continent. And the Rebbe came 2.5 weeks later to the New York harbor to freedom. On the last day, on the 16th day of Sivan, which incidentally is tonight, the last day, he was in Lisbon, and the Rebbe wrote a rumination, a Torah rumination. And what was in his mind? The Nazis bearing from behind, nobody knew, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. A statement which is made in the Gemara, Ein ben David ba, Mashiach can't come, achi is bakish dog l'choyla v'layimtza, till they'll look for a fish for a sick person and they won't find it. What does that mean? What does that mean? Mashiach can't come until there's a scarcity of seafood? What does it mean? So in this rumination, the Rebbe goes on to say that there are many names for Mashiach. Mashiach is a sign of greatness, the greatness of Mashiach. And he says that the notion here is that he develops this idea of greatness, and why that represents the highest level of Mashiach, and why Ben David comes out of humility. David represents humility, so Mashiach is Ben David, the greatness that comes out of humility. This is the description of Mashiach. And then he says, so our sages tell us, Ein Ben David can't come until a chayla wants a fish and he can't find it. What does this mean? So the Rebbe says, it says that Mashiach could come in one of two ways. Either everybody is fully meritorious, or the other way around. And he suggests the following. The concept of chayla, of a sick person, means a person who's spiritually sick, who has a spiritual malaise. And he says a person who has spiritual malaise, what would he have to do? He needs spiritual wellness. If sin is illness, then what is healing? Healing is tshuva. If healing is tshuva, he says, that means to cleave onto Hashem. And he develops this idea that the eitzah, that the advice is for the sick person to find a fish, because the fish represent the creature that are always connected to their source. He said that represents the highest level of cleaving onto Hashem. But he says he looks for a fish v'lo yimotzei. He's not able to find this high level of cleaving to Hashem, and therefore he turns from being a choila, who instead of being to find this high level of cleaving to Hashem, there's another way, that is to yearn for Hashem. And he talks about how that develops in another fashion. From choila, there's a different kind of choila, not the person who is ill, but a person who is yearning for Hashem, who is missing the 50th gate, which a fish is a nun, means 50. And he develops this whole idea, and the bottom line is how the fish represents this very, very lofty level of perfection, but it still doesn't cut it. There's even a deeper level of cleaving, even a deeper level of communion, and when you're missing that, when that's what's on your mind, then Mashiach will come. When that's what people will be looking for, the highest level of communion. Anyway, there's a very, very sophisticated and complicated rumination that the Rebbe jotted down, and it took scholars like weeks to figure out what he meant. What's the point I want to make to you? That when the Rebbe says the Gemara wanted to use a paradigm of cleaving to Hashem, what was the paradigm? The paradigm was the fish. Which brings me to Shmaltz herring. So we know why there's gefilte fish, because it's so important to eat fish, and they couldn't afford the fish. Another reason is brought in the halacha is because the people would have bones, and picking out the bones from the fish is something called malechas boirer, and you're not supposed to do boirer, so they wanted people to eat fish, but at the same time they didn't want people to be violating Shabbat. So what was the only way around it? The only way around it was grind up the fish, take out the bones, grind the fish, and then nobody has a problem. So we know about gefilte fish. Where did the herring come from? So this is really fascinating. The Tzanzer Rav, the Divrei Chaim, had this custom that he would eat herring, salted fish, and after that he would eat regular fish. Okay. He had his eldest son, whose name was Rabbi Yecheskel. He became a Rebbe in his father's lifetime. He had a dispute with his father about Shabbat, about selling businesses for Shabbat, and he went off his own way. He became known as the Shineva Rebbe. He became a Rebbe in Shineva. The Shabbos after his father's passing, he comes to sit Shiva together with his brothers. It's the Shabbos of Shiva, and he eats the gefilte fish, and then he eats the herring. His brother goes nuts. He says, the Shabbos after our father died, you can't even honor our father's custom. It's the Shabbos after. You know he used to first eat herring, and then he would eat fish. Why are you eating the fish and then the herring? So he says, you don't understand. Our father, he said, lived in a place which is called Horodenka or something like that. He's lived in a place called Rudnik. And most of it says many tzaddikim would try to live in cities that were near a freshwater area, either a river or a sea, so they can get fish for Shabbos. Rudnik was not near a river. There was no stream, there's no water there. So what happened in Rudnik was, so he didn't always have fish for Shabbos. So if you didn't have fish for Shabbos, what's the only way to have fish? Fish starts to stink after a little while. What's the only way to have fish for a long time? You have to preserve it, Shmaltz herring. So he used to make a point of making Shmaltz herring. And because oftentimes he didn't have any fish, he would have the Shmaltz herring. So the Shmaltz herring for him became what he got used to eating on Shabbos. And then when he moved to Tzanz, Reb Chaim moved to Tzanz, and there was like on a river, and he could have lots of fish. So for him, he got used to eating herring first. So he continued his custom. So first he would eat herring, and then after he would eat the regular fish. So the Shineva Rebbe tells his brother, he says, you don't understand. For our father, he have to eat the chaviv. For him, herring was special. It reminded him of how he always ate fish on Shabbos. That's what he got used to eating first. He only eat other fish afterwards. He says, for me, I don't like herring as much. I like fresh fish more. So for me, to honor Shabbos, I first eat the fresh fish and only afterwards eat the regular fish. Why do you have to eat both fishes? Why do you have to have herring? We have a medrash that tells us that every mana of Shabbos is kfula. On Shabbos, everything is double. So they used to have two chalos. They have potato kugel and lokshen kugel. And they have two fishes. And that's where the custom came from. That there was herring, Shmaltz herring, and gefilte fish. And this was a basic staple on Jewish tables. In order they should make sure to have two kinds of fish to fulfill this concept of Shabbos. Now this idea of preparing the fish for Shabbos is something that many, many tzaddikim made a lot of hay out of, or I should say a lot of fish out of. In fact, in Likutei Diburim of the Friedrich Rebbe, he in the third section, on page Tovkuf Chavches, he lists a number of things in which the Alter Rebbe got special attention from his teacher, the Maggid. And one of the things was that the Alter Rebbe used to get a piece of fish that the Maggid would prepare by himself every Erev Shabbos and every Erev Yom Tov. So we know two things. Number one, the Maggid used to prepare fish special. Could be he made herring. And that he would give the Alter Rebbe a special piece of his fish. And that was one of the merits that the Alter Rebbe had. So we could see from here that there's a big deal about eating fish. It's a big deal about preparing fish. Did I get it all in? Oh, why do we eat the fish first? Why do we eat fish first? If fish is so great, if fish is so gewaldic, we should eat the meat first. So here is a very interesting halachic teaching from the Kaf HaChaim on Shulchan Aruch. It was the great Rav of Baghdad. And he writes that first he says, you should always eat yakdim basar oif lachilas basar. First you eat chicken, he says, before you eat meat. He says because it's harder to digest, it's denser. But he says, and if you have fish, he says you always make sure to eat the fish before you eat any kind of chicken or meat. And this is not only something which is a health advice, which the Rambam also gives in Hilchos Deis, but actually this is also connected to the spiritual impact of the food we eat. Which takes us now to our Maimer Likutei Torah with Alter Rebbe. And this week's Parsha, and Parshas Ba'aloischa, says that there's a minig Yisrael, it's a custom amongst Jewish people, to eat dogim before basar. First to eat fish, and then to eat the meat. Why is this? So he says the material world is a reflection of a higher world. In the material world that we live in, there's land which is revealed, and then there's sea which is covered. This is a reflection of a higher spiritual reality. One is called Alma de Iskasia, the concealed world, and one is called Alma de Isgaya, the revealed world. And he goes on to explain that fish live in the sea, which is a representation of very holy neshamas that are subsumed into the presence of God, and they live with a constant feeling of the presence of God. Whereas the rest of us, behemoths and chayas, the wild animals, we live on open land, we don't feel the presence of God as much in the same way that the fish feel the presence, and the terminology is Alma de Isgalia and Alma de Iskasia. And therefore he says, when they came to Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'll feed them all the fish. They asked for beef. Moshe said, I'll feed them all the fish in the sea, they won't be happy. So the question is, they didn't ask for fish. They said they remembered fish. They asked for beef. They said, where's the beef? So Moshe said, Ma'ayin li basar. How am I going to get the beef? Now what's the problem? Fish you can get in the desert. You just can't get beef. Like what's the issue? So the Alter Rebbe says on Moshe's high level, Moshe could dip as low as fish. But to animals, Moshe says, I can't do this already. This is way beneath what I'm capable of relating. I can't relate to it. The lowest Moshe could go was the level of fish. But again, fish is the highest level of the material. So the Moshe said, I can feed them all the fish. They still won't be happy. How am I going to get to feed them beef? To what Hashem said, bring other prophets, and so on and so forth. The point being is that when we seek to try to elevate the world that Hashem created, first you take the smaller challenge, then you go to the bigger challenge. Beef is very intense. Because beef is very intense, it can bring you down. It's easier to eat fish. It's less coarse, it's less crass, it has less the ability to bring you down. And speaking of bringing you down, and speaking of Shmaltz herring, I found a fascinating expression in the Sefer Hasidim of the 10th century of Yehuda HaChassid. And he says, Dag maluach hamachuna herrings mevatlem es hataiva. He says, Shmaltz herring, it reduces libido. It reduces the idea of sensual drive. So people who want to rid of taiva, he says, Shmaltz herring is a great thing to eat. Okay, so from all this ganze Maise, with all the things you learned tonight about the fish and the gefilte fish and the herring, and all of it's nice, I will finish with this. Shabbos Parshas Chayesara, the year is 1950, Tafshin Yud Aleph. The Rebbe says that Seudas Shabbos doesn't make a person more earthy or fleshy, like it's brought down in many places. And therefore, so the Shabbos has to be done, the Rebbe said, in the most meticulous and beautiful way. And ideally, everything should be double. Like it says in the Medrash, Kol Iska, the Shabbat, or Kafel, everything about Shabbos is double. However, the Rebbe said, even though there's a custom of eating two kinds of fish, Shmaltz herring and gefilte fish, And even though there's a custom of eating 2 kinds of beef, and the schnitzel and the chicken, everything is double. But the Rebbe said you don't have to be so obsessed with this. He says the main thing is to focus on the spiritual message of Shabbos. If you didn't eat herring, it's not the end of the world. He said the main thing of Shabbos is to focus on the higher calling of Shabbos, and to focus on the mitzvahs of Shabbos, and the study of Torah of Shabbos, and the higher consciousness, which is where all this is supposed to lead us, which is exactly what the Shalosh says after he talks about the importance of eating basar dagim and yayin. He says, but the main thing is not the meat and the fish. The main thing is not the herring. The main thing is that on Shabbos we should try to be a little bit closer to Hashem. And that is some of what there is to say about the gefilte fish and the herring. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us that we should merit to come to the time in which we will all eat the shoyer habar and the levyasan. The levyasan, the leviathan fish, is described as Shmaltz herring, salted away from the 6 days of creation. Why eating fish that was salted away 5,779 years ago is so appetizing, I have no idea. But when Mashiach will come, we'll appreciate the fish, the gefilte fish, the herring, and the fresh salmon too. You hit it?